All right, Sarah, thanks for joining us today. Want to kick off with the business case. How does good copy help your bottom line?
Sure. So, copy is your message. It's the first impression people get of your business. So, it's carrying your message across the internet. And in terms of your bottom line, it helps you convert people, whether that means make a sale or get them to download something or, whatever. But also, it saves you time and money because with marketing, you can keep that message going, be selling, even when you're not actively doing the work.
So there are so many different types of content. Yeah, that's what everyone's talking about nowadays. Content, content, content. But like if you look at it, there's emails, there's newsletters, there's your website, there's social media, then there's search engine optimization, and I'm sure we're pretty not far from how do I do chat AI bot optimization to get chat
Right.
GPT to rank me higher. But so, that gets overwhelming. And then there's video, audio, written, all kinds of different forms. For a new business getting out there, that's, especially me too in my current business, like that's overwhelming trying to figure out where do I start. Getting started, where should you try to focus and try to tackle the copywriting piece?
In some ways, it depends on your industry, your audience, and what your goals are. I always recommend people have kind of a short game channel that they use and then a longer game channel. So by short game, I mean like you'd be able to like make sales right now if you needed to, versus long game is kind of like you're putting in the work now to make sustainable sales over time. SEO is sort of a long game strategy, but it saves you money, time. It's like, you can write a blog post that brings people to your website for 3, 4, 5 years, and you only paid or took the time to write it once. So SEO is definitely good for a long game strategy, but it's not likely to get you sales right now, which a lot of small business owners are concerned about. So that's kind of where social media, and I will say, and communities, because social media, we think Facebook, Instagram, and that doesn't work for every business. But communities, LinkedIn, Quora, Reddit, that type of stuff allows you to talk to people and engage with them instantly, so it's easier to make sales. I'm telling everyone right now for 2023 and beyond, they should be focusing on email and SEO. So email to me is a short game strategy if you've built a list. If you haven't built a list, it takes time to build the list. But once you have an email list, you can sell something every time you send out an email. I know I don't have a very large list. It's maybe 4,000 people, but every time I send out an email, I either get a reply or I sell something or, get them to click on a link or whatever. So your email list, even though that takes time to build, it's definitely worth doing. So if you have a list, email is a great place to focus. Even if you just have contacts, but maybe not a huge list, engaging in email is a great way to kind of get someone's attention. A lot of people, I don't know, I've heard people say email is dead, but it's been around for a long time and it's not going anywhere. It's still the cheapest way to reach people, the most effective way to reach people. If you think about how often you check your email every day, that's a good way to think about how important email is in people's everyday lives. So yeah, I would say email is great for every industry, every offer. And then social media is or communities is a great short-term game plan. You just got to pick the one that makes sense. So I've done a lot of work with tech companies. There's a lot of tech people having conversations on Twitter. Whereas if you're an e-commerce brand, a consumer brand, you might be having those conversations on Facebook or Instagram. So it just depends on, the industry. Find the channel where your audience is and put some time in there. It's better to focus on one channel and do it well than kind of spread yourself too thin across a bunch of channels.
So you would say email and then try to pick one of those socials to target wherever your community is, wherever they congregate the most. Try to focus there and then start
Mm-hmm.
radiating out.
Yeah.
I want to dive in on two more topics there that you brought up in that. And first, you talked about the email list. You're talking about a warm leads list that you have.
Yeah, people who have signed up, opted in, said, I want to hear from you.
4,000, that's still not It's not a small
It's not
size
nothing.
list. Yeah, that's not nothing. So how did you go about building that list for your business? And I guess probably let me back up one more. So Sarah owns the Content Collective and that agency. So you want to kind of walk through your journey of how you built that up a little bit and built out that list and targeted
Yeah,
those
sure.
leads?
Yeah, so initially it was a lead magnet. I made a couple different lead magnets to see what made the most sense. So that's a gated piece of content. People give you their email for it, you send it to them. It can be a million different things. Mine were like kind of ebook type things, and then my most popular one ended up being a spreadsheet that was like a content planner. So that's how I started. I would put the link on social. I would, just periodically talk about it, ask people to download it. Some of those emails have come from workshops I've done, so just marketing different free kind of workshops. Most recently, most of my traffic is coming from YouTube. I publish a video on YouTube once a week. You don't even have to do it that often as long as you're consistent. But the first video I ever made is the one that like stuck and has been bringing people onto my list, one or two a day steadily. So that was still a lead magnet. So I'm getting the traffic from YouTube, but they're downloading the spreadsheet and they give me their email for that. I doubled my list from doing a collaboration, which is another thing I think people forget about. There was someone that was doing, this is big in the online business space. They do these bundles of like free, or sometimes it's like you pay $100 and you get like 50 things, resources. So I was in a bundle like that and I gave away a couple different things that usually I charge for, and that doubled my list. Yeah, that's how I grew it. You can also do, if you don't have like digital products and you're more service based, you can also do like a joint webinar, or even like a sponsor. You could sponsor a webinar, but that's a great way. I've actually gotten clients from doing a joint webinar with someone. I have a client, it's been my client for a couple years. They sign a year-long contract. They're great clients, and I got that from like a content strategy webinar. So the lead magnet is important. Again, what that is will depend on what it is you are selling. You want to make sure that whatever it is useful and enticing to the person that you want to be on your list. And then collaborations, I think, are just a great way. You're basically utilizing someone else's audience and you're providing free value, but you're able to get in front of a new audience and bring more people in that way.
How many lead magnets did you have to play around with before you started getting the ones that stuck?
So I used to do more workshops because I like doing workshops, like webinar type things. But over time, like especially after 1 or 2 years after like the start of COVID, people are just kind of burnt out on online learning. So I would still be doing those if they still worked for me. But yeah, I just tested a couple different ones and found the one that worked for me. I think doing a little planning ahead of time and really thinking about like what does my person care about and what is valuable enough for them to give me their contact information. If you think about it, instead of just doing, oh, let's do an ebook on this thing that I think is important, you won't have to make like a million of them to find the one that works.
I mean, that's copy, and it's got to be good copy
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that actually goes that somebody wants to read. On SEO, that was the second topic that I wanted to highlight. So,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about a little bit of blog posts and stuff, and that being the longer game strategy. There's things that you do that like hit the algorithm and build it up, right? And blog posts is one of them. How does that copy tie into your SEO rankings to help put you in front of more people?
Yeah, so basically the search engine crawls your website, so it can be website pages or blog posts, any kind of content that's on there. It crawls your website, reads it, is what crawling is, and basically says, okay, based on what I'm reading here, this is what I think it's about, and this is who I think it would be good for. So the more content you have on your website, and that includes your blog, the more opportunities Google has to figure out who you are and who they should serve your content to. there's, it gets complicated. You have to do the keyword research and see what people are searching for, because sometimes sometimes people search in weird ways that you're like, what? Especially with voice search. So when you're like, hey Google or Alexa or whatever, and you ask them a question, they take that into consideration too. So sometimes the keywords could be a whole question. But once you find out kind of what people are searching for, and where you have an opportunity to fill in the gaps, kind of what I do is look at, okay, these are topics that are important to my audience, and these are keywords that have a decent volume. People are searching for them. I'm not trying to go up against the big companies that produce, 10 blog posts a week or anything. But sometimes you'll find when you Google something, the results are not great, or it's the same article over and over again. So
seems like it's also like you get the top 10 best. Like, it seems like that's the game now. Whenever you Google anything, everything that comes up is like the 15 best of this, the 17 best of this.
Yeah. So what'll happen is you'll get the 10 best, and then every list is the same except for maybe one. And that doesn't help anybody. So that's the easiest way to rank, is basically to create good content that fills in a need that isn't already, talked about to death. And I mean, that's a great point. The reason why those rank really well is because it's really easy to consume list content. So it's easy to scan it, you know what I mean, if you don't want to read the whole thing. So that's why those rank pretty well. But the more in depth you can go, the more Google will recognize that as good authoritative content. And I think a lot of people, they'll go for the list, but they won't actually provide any value or go in depth on a topic. And so the algorithm is changing. It's always changing, but it's definitely gotten much smarter. It used to be you could just throw keywords in there, and even if it didn't make sense, you could rank. But we're far past those days. Now it's so nuanced that it's not just looking for content, it's looking for that you have authority, that it's, you know what you're talking about, stuff like that. So it's definitely getting smarter, and that's where I'm not sure how this AI stuff is really gonna come into play, because it's actually against Google's terms to create AI content. But then Google's coming out with its own AI, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. So on really from a copy perspective, as I'm looking at my whole copy strategy, we talked our short game, our email and socials, blog post being one of those long-term games. Is that something that you just put on the back burner and then start tackling kind of once you get those things going, or how do you start bundling in some of these different mediums as part of your overall copy strategy?
So for most people, the priority is to make money, right? So you might start with those short game things, and that's where ads come in. The great thing about ads is that they can get you results very quickly. The bad thing about ads is that once you stop paying for them, they don't work anymore. So it actually helps if you have the resources to do the SEO stuff, do the kind of longer game relationship building, but then also use the ads to kind of grow your visibility that way if you can. Gotcha. I mean, I've built my business entirely on organic. We haven't run any ads yet. So it is possible. It's just, you got to do more work that way.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, we've talked about the different types of copy that most businesses have as they're going out there. And then, of course, you're a copywriter. We have you on here. So what is the purpose of a copywriter? How do they start getting integrated? Because when you're starting, it's probably you that's writing that. It's not until you're a large business, like I know you used to work for IBM, that you can have this nice copy team on staff ready to go. So what services do the copywriters provide, and how do you start integrating them in when you're small?
Everyone likes to be like, what's the difference between copy and content? And really, it's semantics. Technically, copy is stuff that is written with the intention to influence someone to do something. So either buy or download or whatever. And content is not that way. But even when you write a blog post, which would be considered content, usually there's a CTA at the bottom that says, join our email list, or, check out our services or whatever. So it's all kind of the same. There's not really a big reason to be stuck on that difference. But a copywriter, yeah, basically writes any kind of content you need. So there are people who are generalists that can kind of write any type of content. There are people that specialize in email or specialize in sales pages. There are also people that will specialize in certain industries, so they might just write for tech or just write for wellness brands. And then there are people who can kind of work with anyone. We specialize in brand voice, which is basically writing the copy so it sounds like you. Not every copywriter is great at that. They might be great at like writing for the wellness industry and knowing the terminology and stuff, but maybe not necessarily making it sound like you or your company, whatever the voice is you create for your company, wrote it. So in terms of like, so when you first get started, you're going to have to write a lot of your own copy. So it is helpful to kind of use what's out there, use the free resources that are out there. There's a lot of great ones from HubSpot, videos, resources to learn like the basics, the foundations of good copywriting, because you're going to have to write a lot of it yourself. But then once you get to the point where you're making enough money to invest in your marketing a little bit, hiring a copywriter just makes your copy that much more effective. So copywriters are skilled at being able to get people to take action. Again, whether that's a sale or something else. Copywriters also are great at building that relationship building content that's good for, you know, turning one-time customers into long-time fans. And so that's why you would hire someone, is once you get to the point where I know the basics, my marketing's working okay. A lot of people grow their business initially through more networking, face-to-face stuff, so they don't need a bunch of copy. But once you're ready to start, you know, to scale and have content out there that kind of speaks for you, that's when you'd start looking for a copywriter.
You've talked about, there's a lot of overlap between, you know, you have marketing and you have copy, and really sometimes they're a little bit of one and the same. But, you know, from the strategy perspective, is that where a copywriter is going to be able to help me on, hey, this is the strategy you need to do with your copy to achieve your marketing goals? Or how does that overlap? Or do I have to have a marketing person and a copy person, marry them together? How do I balance those needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people think you just need one person, but everything in marketing requires content. So even if you're talking advertising, like something that is not necessarily a bunch of content, it's just a little bit, it all requires content. So that's kind of where the copywriter comes in. Some copywriters have strategy experience, some do not. So a marketing strategist is going to, or like they might call themselves something different, but a marketing person is going to be able to take a look from like, here's what the campaign needs to look like. Here's the positioning for this. These are all the different pieces we need. And then a copywriter would sort of implement that. But there are also people, like I am also a content strategist. So I have experience. Basically, if you came to me and you said, here's what I'm trying to sell, here's my goal for this, I could tell you what content you need to get it done. But not every copywriter has strategy experience, so it just depends. You can find that person as one person, or you might need two different people for that. It just depends.
I think as a small business, finding that person, that one person that can do both is what you want, or especially when your budgets are tight, you're trying to maximize every dollar that goes out the door. And
yeah,
I think that's a good segue to the question of, how do I find a copywriter that has the things that meet my needs? Because there's a ton of different types out there. How can I find the one that, maybe if I only have those dollars to hire one person, that can do the strategy and the copy for me and really help take some stuff off my plate?
Yeah, so in terms of like where to physically find them, there are a bunch of different places you can look. It's not an easy thing, so don't expect to be like, well, I'll hire a copywriter tomorrow to do this, because there's, you know, if you want to find the right person and not pay for a bunch of mistakes, it's worthwhile to do the work up front. So, and I've hired a bunch of copywriters in my corporate career and now as an agency owner. Sometimes it helps to ask colleagues if they have someone they recommend. Now, I wouldn't always go with that recommendation. It really depends on the colleague, right? If they're in a totally different industry and have a totally different business, then the person they recommend might be a great writer for them, but not for you. But it's a good place to start because having that recommendation, you already know that you're going to get a good experience, and hopefully that person will tell you whether or not they think it's a good fit. LinkedIn is a great place to look. If you're hiring someone in-house, it's going to be different than hiring a freelancer. So if you're hiring someone in-house, I recommend doing the whole job description, like put it on Indeed, LinkedIn, those kinds of sites. There are also sites like that where you can find freelance writers. So you post kind of your freelance project, and then people will either reach out to you or you can find freelancers and reach out to them. Upwork is one of those. Upwork is like, it's hit or miss. It really is. So I used to work on Upwork when it was Elance like 10 years ago. There are good people on there, but there's just so much noise that it's kind of hard to narrow it down. And also you get what you pay for. So a lot of people will get on Upwork, think, oh great, I can do this thing for $20, you know? And then they get the product and they're like, what? It's like, yeah, there's $20 worth of, you know, skill there. But there's also some places like there are communities that you can look in. Cult of Copy is one. They have a Facebook group where you can literally post like, hey, I'm looking for a tech writer that wants to write blogs. Here's what I pay. Here's how many words. And then people will kind of pitch to you. Another group is Superpath, and there are all kinds of content. So you could find a content strategist on there, a growth marketer, but you can post jobs on there. If you join the community, you can kind of find people looking for work. So looking for those kinds of communities, I think you are better off because it's specific to content. Whereas on Upwork, you can find people to do anything. If you look specifically in a content community, the people who are active in there are going to be people who, you know, are a little, at least you know that they kind of know what they're doing. So that's what I would suggest.
And are those both of those? I know you said Cold Copy was on Facebook. Is Superpath also a Facebook group, or is that another?
So Superpath's actually a Slack community, but they have a website, and you know they have their own process for taking putting your job description on there. But yeah.
And you highlighted a great piece, subject matter expertise. So how does that work with a copywriter? Do I want to try to find that niche specialty, or am I going to spend so much time trying to find that niche that a good copywriter is able to learn? How does that balancing game kind of work? Like, I'm niche tech recruiting. You got to know the market. You got to know multiple pieces. It's not just writing some like basic copy to really resonate. How does that work in the copywriting space and trying to assess your copywriter needs?
Yeah, so most skilled copywriters that do well, they built their business, they're in demand, are good at researching, so they can almost, write about anything. However, they might say, okay, I'm really into the beauty industry, so that's what I'm focused on. You can definitely find a niche copywriter. It just depends on if the person can do it or not. So you could engage with like an agency that has 10 writers and they have one on their staff that is really good at tech. Or you could find a tech freelancer. Cost is also going to come into play here because I know from my corporate experiences mostly in tech, and it's expensive to hire a tech freelancer. They're going to charge more than a generalist. So it really depends on also the complexity of the thing. Tech recruiting, if someone has written for startups before or worked with startups, or software companies or whatever, then they might understand that. But if you're talking about like coding or something, you're going to have to find someone that like knows that. So it depends on how easy a thing it is to learn. Like medical law is typically, you have a specialist, but some things are easier to pick up.
You mentioned the difference between a freelancer and an agency. It sounds like through this conversation that leveraging an agency may be your better route because it's probably going to be specialized, right? Or at least easier to see what their specialty may be.
Yeah, so The difference between hiring a freelancer and an agency, and I've kind of worked in all the positions. So, I've been in-house for companies, I've worked in-house for agencies. I was a freelancer for like 10 years. I've worked in-house for like big brands, small brands. So who you hire really just depends on your needs and your budget. So a freelancer, you get one person, and sometimes that is what works for you. They can give you maybe a little more individual attention if that's what you need. They might be able to work with you in different ways. They might be more flexible. It just depends on who you're engaging. An agency, you get a whole group of people. So often it's a little more expensive, but the quality of work can sometimes be better. Of course, there are bad agencies out there. There are bad freelancers out there. So it just depends. But when I was a freelancer, I would write the copy and then, let it sit for a day, and then I would edit it. But there are still things I'm not going to see when I've been staring at this piece of content for 3 days. In my agency, we have someone who writes it, someone who edits it, and then a third person who does looks at formatting and does a final grammar check and stuff. So we rarely get revisions from people because the copy is in the best, it's the best version of the copy that it could be. Whereas when you get a freelancer, it's just them. Also, timeline can come into play. So I know some, I wouldn't call them freelancers. They have a business, but they're solo and they're booked out for months. And if you need copy next month, that's not going to work. An agency has a little more, can take on a little more volume, but also, like you said, they have multiple writers. So they have writers that specialize in different things. I have a copywriter who's really, really great at emails and really great at certain industries. And then I have another writer who takes on other industries and is really good at sales pages. So that's part of the value of an agency is you've got that whole team, and there are different people that bring different skills to the table, instead of just kind of relying on that one person.
When interviewing these companies or a freelancer, what are some of the questions you should be asking to assess if they're going to be a good fit for you and your company?
Yeah, so I would ask them their background, so find out how long they've been doing it. Just because they've been doing it for, 3 years doesn't mean that they're not high quality, right? One of my copywriters has been a copywriter maybe half the time I have, and she's just so talented that I think she's better than I am. So that isn't exactly what you're looking for. But if they're like, oh, I was an intern and I've had 2 clients, then that gives you an idea of, you can give them a chance, but if you have the resources, you might not want to hire someone who's newer.
Yeah, to your point there, background's great. I'm hoping when I contract something out that it's a collaborative thing. It's, hey, I'm coming to you because I'm not the subject matter expert. So I'm hoping you have at least an established playbook that you can help this is things that similar companies have done that have been successful that could help you.
Yeah, and so asking them what industries have they worked with, what types of companies, that gives you an idea. A lot of copywriters, especially if they're working as freelancers, they probably have a really rich background of different types of things that have given them different skill sets. I would also ask them what their process is of working with someone. It almost like their onboarding process. They might not call it that, especially if they're just one person. But how do they find out about your brand? How do they get the information they need? Do they work through email? Do you have to join their Slack or get in their project management system? That's important because, one, it kind of gives you an idea if you're going to be able to work well together, but also it lets you know if they've thought about those things. If they don't have a process for kind of learning your voice, learning your industry, learning your brand, then maybe they're not the best fit for you. Turnaround time is another thing you should ask about. Ideally, you come to someone well before you need something. There are plenty of people who have a firm, it's got to be a month. We're usually 2 to 3 weeks turnaround time, depending on our, how much is on our calendar. But that will really impact whether you work with them or not, if you need something quickly, or if this is more, we're just looking for someone to work with us, on an ongoing basis. And that's another question I would ask. Depends on what your needs are, but is this a one-time project, or do you want to build a relationship with this person for them to create content for you, for the long haul? So even though a freelancer is not part of your team, you're not going to treat them like an employee. A lot of freelancers are looking for ongoing, consistent work. They don't have to learn 1,000 brands. You know what I mean? They're learning that one. They're getting good at that. It's quicker for them to write once they know a company. So I would ask about that as well. Like, are they just wanting some quick cash, to do a project and get it done? Or do they want to work with you for the long haul?
You bring up a good point, like learning your brand, learning your voice, learning your industry. What is a reasonable expectation there? I think we all think that I can just take my head and you're going to have this massive glass ball, and the first thing you send me is going to be this gold copy that makes me $1 million. And that's not realistic, but myself, I know I've been guilty of, like, maybe not necessarily with copy, but in certain things that you've contracted out, you're hoping for this first product because you have all this domain knowledge that you don't even realize you have. What is a reasonable expectation there of a company and a good copywriter, of the back and forth and the patience that should be expected for them to start really like hitting it with ringer copy?
Yeah, so that's why it's important to ask about process, because if they're like, well, you just give me the topic and then I write about it, and you have a very specific take on something, or you want to write thought leadership content that's very specific insights, you might want someone that says, well, I interview you and I ask you specific questions to get the information I need. So finding out how that person works and how they get that information from you is important. I would say you do want to give them some time to get to know you, but how much time that is will depend on what their process is. So for instance, we have a process where we have a questionnaire, and then we have a kickoff call, and then we write the content. And we've tweaked it over time so that questionnaire gets us exactly what we need to know to get started. The call gets us fills in any of the gaps. And then whenever we have clients, like we have monthly clients that we'll write content for every month, we might ask them to give us voice notes on something. So they'll just info dump, and then we'll take that and turn that into content. So I would say you do want to give them some time, even if they're an industry expert, to get to know your specific voice, your take on things. So maybe not, initially you might have revisions. That's another thing you should ask about. Do they include revisions as part of the process? If they don't, I would caution you against using them, not because you should expect revisions, but because they might not understand how the writing process works. So I would say give people a little grace in the beginning as they get to learn things, and make sure that you communicate with them. People are not great at giving copywriters feedback. They'll say, well, I don't really like this. Well, what don't you like about it? We can't, revise it unless we have, So if you're clear with your feedback, clear with your expectations, I think you'll have the best possible outcome. But yeah, I would say give them a little time. Sometimes people will work with us on a project before they engage us for a longer retainer. I think that's a great idea. Like, make sure it's a good fit before you go, all in and invest a bunch of money. But yeah, don't expect the first thing you get to be absolutely perfect, because revisions are part of the writing process.
Yeah. It's creative. It's not an exact science. You're working through it as fluid. So look at the domain expertise and the level of importance that you place on that. Then look at process. If there needs to be some type of process to get your voice, your vision, how your company works, and how they move your copy internally to create it, and then expect that, hey, it's not going to be perfect, but it should be decent. Hopefully, if you had a good copy company and set your expectations. But if it's the first time you're working with somebody, expect a revision. That's part of the
Mm-hmm.
creative process. And then just leverage are the revisions, first or second, are we starting to bracket it in where we want, or maybe look at another agency or freelance.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to switch gears because I want to continue the conversation because we've mentioned it a few times, and I think it's very important because I'd imagine it's probably the base fundamental of copy, which is your voice. And
Mm-hmm.
we hear that. And I think especially when you look on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, everyone's talking about content. And in the age of marketing, that's becoming the new thing. I need content. I need my lead magnets. I need all this top of funnel work to bring in leads. But finding a voice is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
How would you tell somebody to start trying to define that voice, refine that voice, and figure out who they are for their copy, whether it's them individually or their company?
Yeah, so you definitely have to have a good sense of your ideal client or clients. Often there's more than one that you're serving. And you have to have like a really good idea, not just like, okay, I'm going to target CMOs or something. You really have to know, like, okay, CMOs, just any CMO, like, are you focusing on an industry? Are you focusing on a certain type of person that has a certain type of idea about a certain thing? So you really have to know your audience first. And a lot of people think they do and just move on, but then you get people who I ask them, who's your target audience? And they're like, "Oh, mom entrepreneurs." Okay. What do they care about? What kind of language do they use? Where do they hang out? All of that research you need to do first. And in the online business space, you see a lot of people just trying to get up quickly and they skip that. More on the corporate side, they've already done that work. But once you know who you're speaking to, your voice is, I like to tell people, think about if your business was a person, what kind of personality would they have? What kind of stuff would they say? How would someone describe them? So there's a difference between someone who is, let's say, maternal and friendly. Those are two different things, even though they have some overlap, right? If you're
Yeah.
maternal, you might be friendly.
Yeah. You'd
But you really
hope
want,
there's a little bit of friendliness in there.
yeah.
Hope so.
And sometimes, sometimes you have that friend that's like the friend mom. So there's overlap, but there's a difference in how we perceive that person and what type of language they use and stuff like that. So that's where I suggest starting. And that person that your brand is should be a person that your audience likes or respects, or what I mean. There's got to be some kind of connection there. And then you really just want to think about, okay, how do you want, there's a difference also between tone and voice. Sometimes people confuse them. So your tone can change from piece to piece, but your voice should stay the same throughout. So if you're writing, let's say you mess up and something happens, you mess up. When you write some kind of, sorry about this, we messed up, here's how we're making it right, that's going to have a different tone than, hey, we just launched this thing we're really excited about. But the voice will stay the same. So think about, who is your brand if it was a person? What is their personality like? Like, you can go real deep on this and create a whole, person. And then think about, how do they speak? Do they use slang? Are they more professional? And you can be professional and casual at the same time. Do they use a bunch of jargon? Is that important? And as you kind of come up with these things, you want to think about, this has to appeal to that person you're trying to bring in. It should also align with your values. So if one of your main values is transparency, then your voice might be kind of straightforward. No BS. We're not using fluffy language. We're not beating around the bush. Whereas if your discipline or something is one of your values, your voice is probably not going to be soft, right? So you want to make sure that your voice aligns with that person you're trying to reach, but then also the values of your company, which hopefully you define those before you start working on your voice as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you really have to start there, especially with a company, because at some point you're going to get to a size that you've got a good bit of money that you can go out and you can pay a creative agency to do the legwork. But I mean, it's expensive. It's tens of thousands of dollars for them to go out and do that research. And then you get the
Yeah.
style, or not the style guide, but the brand guide that you can give out to your whole company of like, these are the do's and don'ts of how you
Hmm.
write copy in this company. But that's a lot of revenue before you can reach a point where you're comfortable doing that. And it's that middle part of like, you still need to have that. And you're right. It's, you got to have your values, you got to have your culture, you got to have something to be able to go off of to give yourself some type of separation and not just, look like everybody else.
And also, you don't want people to be like, what? So your values are around fun, but you have a not fun voice. It has to align. You have to create a cohesive thing. And a lot of people have trouble, especially they're just starting a business. So founders or solopreneurs, who are not working under a personal brand, have trouble differentiating their voice from their company's voice. Which, to that I say, your company will probably have a lot of your voice in it, but you might like to swear or tell dirty jokes. Your business isn't going to do that unless that's your, you could. So you want to think about what pieces of my own voice do I want the company to carry forward, and don't feel like it has to be something completely different from yourself, because your fingerprints are all over the business, even if it's not you as the face of the business.
And how do you, as copywriters, help companies find that company voice? How do you help work through that creative process to get copy that provides some level of personality and culture of the business?
A lot of our clients, even the ones that pay us a lot of money, don't have that documented. A lot of people just, that's not something they think about. It's something we can always do later. There is no document that says this is our voice, these are the words we use. So how we pull that stuff out is through our onboarding process, asking those questions in the questionnaire, getting that info. Now,
What
we
are some of
don't
those
create.
example questions that you ask to tease
Sure.
that out?
Yeah. So, we ask about values. We ask about how do you want someone to feel when they read your copy. Sometimes people put like empowered, or like they just talked
Yeah.
to a knowledgeable friend. So that kind of stuff. We also ask, like, what are some words you always say? What are some words you never say? So in certain industries, there are buzzwords that people don't want to use. So that's important to think about. That kind of stuff kind of helps set the personality of the brand. So it's a separate service if you want us to help you find and define a voice. Copywriters in general are not going to create a voice for you. And if they do, you just have to be happy with what they provide. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We work with people who have a defined voice already. Otherwise, they have to kind of work with us on the strategy piece first.
So that should be
But
something though, as you're really kicking off as a business and looking at the current phase and life cycle you're in, that you should be looking at is my brand voice really defined? Do I know what that is? So when you're starting to put out content and copy, you're able to, if your copywriter isn't starting there, or you're not taking time with your copywriter to really dig into that, you're setting yourself up for failure, and probably spending a
yeah,
lot of money in the process.
yeah, and you might end up with a voice that sounds just like a
Yeah.
competitor, which isn't going to help you out. Part of our process also for learning voice is going and looking at content you've already created that you love, that you say, this sounds just like how I want it to sound. This is the, epitome of my voice. And so we're able to get from that little things like, okay, this person never uses contractions, right? They always, they're long-winded or something. And so part of the voice work is just writing, doing the writing, revising it, seeing what works for people, what doesn't, and then it's not even maybe a conscious thing. You narrow in on that voice eventually, and a copywriter can take what you've already written and continue to write in that way, even if it's not defined somewhere. Now, I will say, and I say this as someone who does not have a brand voice document for my own brand, it is helpful to have that defined somewhere, because if something happens, and it's just like operations. If something happens and the information is only in your head, there's no SOP, it's going to blow up, right? So if you are in a coma for a month, your business should still be able to run, and someone should still be able to know your voice, you know? So it does help to document it, even if it's not pretty or super comprehensive, to just have, even if it's just your notes, your thoughts that you know, it evolves over time. It's helpful to have something that you can provide, but if you can't, that's again where the process part comes into play.
I want to talk now about growing your volume of content. So, what is good strategy that people should take into account as they start looking at growing now the volume and the number of mediums of content that they're putting out in copy?
I always suggest that people just focus on 1, 2, maybe 3 like places where you're putting content at first until you can get consistent there. But once you're consistent and you're ready to branch out, once you've started getting results, you kind of know what copy works, what copy doesn't, what topics resonate, then you can kind of branch out and work on other platforms. A lot of people they either don't think about it or they think it's cheating or something to repurpose your content. So podcasts are a great example. You've got a podcast, you've got all this content, you can use the video, you can use the audio, you can take pieces of it out and you could just transcribe it and make a blog post. So that's a good way to kind of up the volume.
I saw something great the other day that it was literally take your podcast. Nowadays you can upload it, have it transcribed, and have your whole thing clean up the language. And then now, boom, you've got blog posts, key content you can take out to, you're right. Like you can repurpose. I mean, that's what I plan on doing with all these is, you know, one podcast recording, hour and a half, 2 hours of prep, an hour recording time, like 3 hours total of work. I now have a base of content that can last me months.
Yeah, and also you can use it over time unless it's like extremely timely and about a certain trend. If it's evergreen and it, you know, makes sense all the time, you could pull out a podcast episode from 3 years ago and be like, Throwback Thursday, here's, you know, this great, you know, conversation I had, whatever. You can recycle that stuff and you can also update it. So like if you have old blog posts that maybe are getting a lot of traction, but the stats are 5 years old and you want to add new stats, you can go back and update it. And now it's a fresh piece of content, even though you're not completely rewriting it. And I think a lot of people, I don't know, a lot of people say, yeah, I'm good on video, I'm just not good at writing. But it's like you can literally transcribe that video and you have the written content. That's actually a tip that I give my clients who are like, I just sit down to write and nothing comes out, but I can talk all day. I'm like, then talk all day, record it, transcribe it, and you've got a starting point. You're going to have to clean it up, of course, but it's a lot easier than sitting there for an hour looking at a, you know, blinking cursor. So
what systems or processes, best practices should people think about to be able to get good copy and be able to provide like good content out to people?
Yeah, so if more than one person is creating it, and even if only one person is creating it, having a place where you can track the, you know, the workflow of things. So we use Asana, which is kind of cool because it gives you like a list view or like a Kanban board. So you can say, okay, this was written, let me drag it over to editing or whatever. Having a process that every piece of content goes through, and then having a place where we can see what the like status is of it. The more people you add to that process, the more important that becomes, because there has to be kind of a clear idea of who is responsible for what. You can use a spreadsheet for that too. Just give everyone access to the spreadsheet. You don't even need a project management tool. Having a defined process. It's very important to have a defined process. So if you're having, let's say you have a marketing person on your team that has hired freelancers, maybe they edit the copy, but does it have to be checked by a subject matter expert or the CEO before it goes out? Like, what is the process? What are the approvals you need through time? You kind of just need to think, think about that before you start creating content, because you'll lose a lot of it. I think also like a repository, whether that is a spreadsheet that kind of serves as a library where all your pieces of content are. So you would put, links and titles to all your YouTube videos, links and titles and descriptions of all your podcast episodes. Having that, and obviously the earlier you create that, the better, because then you're going to have to go back and it takes a long time. But having all that makes it easier to repurpose, makes it easier to update, makes it easier to not duplicate your efforts. So if a salesperson says, I need a piece of content on this, everyone's asking me about this, knowing that they can go and just look in the spreadsheet and find the piece of content so you don't accidentally have to create it again. I think that's important too. And I would say that's like the very least is having a repository, a library, and then having a process that content goes through from beginning to end.
I think the process is something that you hit on that was key that I saw in a growing company was first it's just one or two people, or it's very sporadic. You're like, hey, I need a blog post on this, get it out, and you task it out to somebody. The bottleneck becomes the like ringleader. There's only one or two people that are writing. That's not their day job. Then, it really puts a limit on how much you can put out. So ideally you have more people in your organization writing content, or more, maybe it's a mixture of people in your organization, freelancers or your own internal copywriters, but having a good process that can democratize content could also increase your volume, because now you've facilitated something that, hey, the end state's going to be great, but like I now have some wickets that I can get a bunch of people working to up my volume, right?
Yeah, definitely. I worked for a company where I kind of managed all of that, and we had freelance tech writers. We had subject matter experts who were not writers. Some of them were English as a second language, so they kind of gave us the very rough skeleton and we would edit it. And then the CEO would write stuff. So you're getting stuff from all these different people, and yeah, if you don't have a process, you just have a pile of stuff and then stuff gets lost. So I think keeping track of it somewhere, whether that's a project management system, a spreadsheet, just having it written somewhere so that also someone else can see where things are. Anyone who needs to have eyes on it can have eyes on it.
Last one. So if people want to find you, where can they go on internet, social media?
My agency is at thecontentcollective.co. My personal website is sarahjaneburt.com. There are links to all the socials on both of those. I invite anyone who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm starting to publish more stuff there. That's kind of my main channel now. And I love learning stuff from other people that are in and outside of my industry. So